1 Peter 3, verses 18 through 22. 1 Peter 3, 18 through 22. Great passage here. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through water. Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers, having been subjected to him. So I want you to see here that Jesus suffered for our sins, and I think it's important to note that he said that he suffered once for sin. Jesus, when he died on the cross, when he suffered the humiliation that he suffered before he went to the cross, when he was beaten, when he had the crown of thorns pushed down on him, when they pulled out his beard, all the humiliation that he suffered at that time, all the way to the point of having to carry his cross and to go all the way up onto the hill and to be nailed with his hands and his feet onto that cross, and the cross lifted up, and he had to suffer up there till he basically choked on his own fluids and died. He did that once and for all. It was final. What is it that Jesus said when he was on the cross before he died? He said, "It is finished." He didn't say to be continued. He said, "It is finished." We don't crucify Christ over and over and over again, because he was crucified once for all for sins. He suffered once for sin. And so it's over with. He has taken care of the sin problem that man had, that sin problem that separated us from God. He was righteous. He was righteous, and we are unrighteous. And so the righteous then suffered for the unrighteous. It's backwards from what the world usually expects, right? Do we send the defendant that's convicted of a crime to prison, or do we send the victim that suffered the crime to prison? Which one do we send? Right? We send the criminal, right? We don't send the victim to prison because we would think that's really bad. Well, what happened here? Who was the victim? It was Jesus. And who was the criminal? We were. We were the ones that committed the sin that put him up on the cross, and yet he suffered and died for us. We couldn't complete the task that Jesus completed, no matter what we tried to do, because we weren't worthy to complete the task. If we died on the cross, we deserved it. When we die, we deserve it. And there wasn't all the animals that they sacrificed in the Old Testament. They had to do it over and over and over again, right? What did they do? Every Passover, the lambs were sacrificed. And the lambs were sacrificed. They had the Day of Atonement where they would put their hands on the animal and then send it out of the camp and then sacrifice it. They would do all those things over and over and over. And that's what they did for the temporary removal of God's wrath, a temporary removal of sin from them. But they had to keep doing it. Why? Because they kept sinning over and over and over. Every year. Why did they need another Day of Atonement? Because they had sinned again. Why did they need another Day of Atonement the next year? Because they sinned again. And then the next year, and the next year, and the next year, up until Jesus. Then when he dies, it was a sacrifice that was finally worthy to take care of all the sin. Because he never sinned. He was righteous, and so since he was righteous and he died for the unrighteous, then it was a full and final sacrifice. He paid the debt that we couldn't pay. It was a debt he didn't owe, but he paid. And those of us that owed the debt, it was paid on our behalf by him. The righteous died for the unrighteous so that he could, he says, to bring us to God. He built our bridge to God. Remember back in the garden? What did God do in the cool of the day with Adam and Eve? He went on a walk with them. That's pretty cool, isn't it? That in the cool of the day, God would go on a walk with them. But then they sinned. And God came down for his walk, and he didn't know where they were, right? He knew where they were. He wanted to ask them where they were, though. He said, "Where are you?" They said, "Well, I'm hiding because I'm naked." "Who told you were naked?" "Well, I ate." And she says, "Well, the serpent gave it to me and we ate it. And then we realized we didn't have any clothes on, so we hid because we were ashamed that we were naked." And then there was that separation. Because what did God say? Get out of the garden. Not only did they physically have to leave the garden, but it was also symbolic of the separation between man and God. When we were there close with God in the garden, it's because sin didn't get between us. Sin hadn't entered the world yet. But when sin entered the world, then there went a chasm between God and man. So how do we get back? You have to build a bridge, right? If you want to get across the river, what do you have to do? If you want to take your car across, you got to build a bridge. And so that's what Jesus did. When he died on the cross, he built that bridge back across. And the way that he did it is because by him being righteous, dying for us, the unrighteous, now when God looks at us, he doesn't see our unrighteousness anymore, but he sees the righteousness of Jesus. So that then we can have communion with him. Then we can have fellowship with him. Jesus brought us life, eternal life, and fellowship with God through his death. Being put to death, he was made alive in the Spirit. And in the same way, through his death, we are made alive to the Spirit. Now, this is probably one of the most interesting passages in 1 Peter when you read it. And there's been books and books written about this one verse, really a verse and a half. It says in verse 19, "In which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah." So let's go back and let's think about Noah a little bit. In Noah's day, what is it that was going on the earth? Is it said that the sons of God went in to the daughters of man, and they made a race of the Nephilim, right? The giants, and that's when the giants roamed the earth during that time. Right? So that's what was going on in the days of Noah. And we studied this in Genesis a while back, and we talked about, well, who were the sons of God? And we came to the conclusion that the most likely answer to who were the sons of God that had came down and knew the daughters of women or the daughters of men, and know in the Old Testament sense, it was demons who had possessed men and then mated with human women, which then made kind of a hybrid demonic/human baby. And what happened to those? They drowned in the flood. But what do you do with the spirits? Because can you drown a spirit? No, it doesn't have flesh, right? So what happened to them is then they were imprisoned. And they were imprisoned in the depths. And you can see this some through some of the prophets that you read in the Old Testament, and you can kind of see it alluded to in Revelation, and you see it alluded to here, that those evil spirits that had caused all this trouble with man and had brought mankind down to the point where God said, I'm going to press the delete button on everything but Noah's family and 2 of each kind of animal, and we're going to start over again. They had been captured, and Jesus basically went down there to proclaim to them, I won. I won. He went down there and proclaimed to them, he said, I'm dead right now, but on the third day, I'm going to get right back up out of that, and I'm going to walk, and death is going to be dead when I rise again. And he proclaimed to those demons those things. He proclaimed to those spirits in the prison, the ones that did not obey, when God's patience finally wore thin in the days of Noah. So he proclaimed to those demons that were held after the flood. And now Peter kind of says something that can be confusing if you don't take it in full context. So first he's talking about the ark, and he says there were 8 people, right? Noah and his family. They were put into the ark, and they lived. Everybody else outside the ark died. So you have those 8 people that are in there, and he said they were in the ark, and that made them go safely through the water. All right? Everybody else drowned because there's only so high you can get when the water goes up over the mountains. But what did Noah's family do? They got in the ark. They were saved because the ark, it went up. And then it went back down. They were able to go out and repopulate the earth. And then he says, as an analogy to that baptism corresponds to this. And since baptism corresponds to this, that baptism then saves you. And now this has given a lot of people heartburn, right? What do you mean baptism saves me? Does that mean I go to hell if I'm not baptized? Or does it mean that once I'm baptized, I'm saved and nothing else matters? No, I don't think that's what he's getting at all. You have to read it in context. Was it the ark that saved Noah? Or was the ark a method in which God saved Noah? The ark was the method in which God saved Noah, right? If Noah hadn't had the faith to do what it was that God had told him to do, even though everybody else in the world was mocking him for doing it, would he have been saved? He was saved by what? As Hebrews 11 tells us, by faith. Right? He was saved by faith. But that was the manner in which God did it. And baptism, the same way, is the outward manifestation of God's salvation of us. The ark was the outward manifestation that Noah had been saved from the water by God. And our baptism is the outward manifestation that our souls that are inside our ark have been saved by God. It's the cleansing of the inside through the omnipotent Jesus' sacrifice that is demonstrated when we say, I'm going to do something that the world thinks is really weird. The world thinks that some of the things Christians do are really weird. And there's 2 of them in the Baptist church that we call the ordinances. They say, you eat these little crackers and drink grape juice. That's weird, right? To the world, it is weird. But to us, it's a reminder. What's it say across the front of the table? This do in remembrance of me. It's a reminder that Jesus' body was broken for us and that his blood was shed for us. And baptism is the other one. People don't just go. I mean, yeah, if you're playing around in the pool, you might dunk somebody's head down. But here, we've got a bathtub in the sanctuary that has, thank goodness, heated water that goes into it. And you go up there and we say something that almost sounds ritualistic, and then we put you down in the water and we bring you back up, and the world thinks that's weird. But you know what it is? If you're willing to get up there and do that as an outward manifestation of your salvation, it shows the world, hey, I'm different. I'm different because I am saved. So we do things that are different. He says, and I think to even hammer this home, he says that baptism now saves you, and he says, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for good conscience. Say, Lord, I believe in you and I trust in you, and that's why I'm going to even be baptized, to demonstrate to you my love for you, my desire to live for you. The water is just water. The same way we believe as Baptists that when Jesus said, "This is my body, take and eat," that it was bread. He was being symbolic. That when he said, "This is my blood, take and drink," that it wasn't his blood, it was the wine that they used. And the water is symbolic as well. It's just water. It's just water. And the question is, are you just getting wet, or are you really demonstrating your faith? And that's the important thing. And if you don't have that inside faith, then you just got wet. You just got wet. It's symbolic of going death and resurrection. It's showing us what we will do. We will die, and then we will be resurrected again. It's not that there's anything special about the water. It's the symbolism behind it that's special. Everything has been subjected to Jesus. He's omnipotent. After he died, suffering once for sins, after the righteous died for the unrighteous, after he died in his flesh and was resurrected in the Spirit, during that time when he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, the ones that didn't obey, when all's said and done, he's gone to heaven. He sits at the right hand of God. That's where the powerful sit, right? If you were with the king or with the emperor at that time, in the time of the New Testament, you wanted to know who was really helping the emperor call the shots, look to his right hand. And there's Jesus now sitting at the right hand of God. Angels, authorities, powers, everything else subject to him. He willingly subjected himself to all those things to die for us. But now he is omnipotent. He is no longer subjecting himself to anyone. He is back in his rightful place. He suffered. And if you really want to think about his suffering, yeah, the stuff on the cross was bad. But think about what he had to do for a life. He left heaven. He willingly withheld his power for those 33 or so years that he lived on this earth, and subjected himself to the same things that we go through, so that nobody could say, well, yeah, it was easy for him. He didn't have to live a life like I did. No, he suffered in every way we did. He was tempted in every way we did, but he did it perfectly. He did it perfectly. I saw a bumper sticker the other day, and it said, "Do you follow Jesus this close?" And I thought, that's really not a good thing to ask a Christian, because if that is the thing, I'm going to try to get all the way up onto your bumper, because that's how, I want to follow Jesus so close that if he stops to smell the roses, I bump into the back of him. Right? Why? Because of this. Because he died for me. The unrighteous, the righteous died for me. Any comments or questions on that?